Welcome back, it's me, Lou. I'm here for another action figure unboxing and review. Today will be a special video as we jump into the time machine and travel back a whole 10 years to the year 2015. From Hasbro in their Marvel Legends series, we are featuring the Marvel Avengers 3-pack, which during its release was only available at Toys R Us. Alright, Toys R Us, rest in peace here in the United States. Even though there's the pop-up stores, and I think that one real store, Toys R Us is pretty much non-existent in the States. You know, I miss it a lot. But 10 years ago, Hasbro gave us this TRU exclusive. It was an Avengers 3-pack, which depicted Vision, the Sam Wilson Captain America, and the Kate Bishop Hawkeye as they appeared in the comics. So this was considered their modern looks during that time period, and it's a great looking 3-pack. I bought this recently at one of my local collectible toy stores. You know, the price was pretty fair, so you know, I decided to pull the trigger. You know, even though I have, I think, this version of Sam already, I really wanted the comic book Kate Bishop over here. On the back of the box, a nice close-up photo of all three figures. And let's get started and open up this little piece of yesterday. Alright, so this is a very large box, so it's kind of hard to navigate it under my camera, but we'll see what I can do. Alright, these figures are looking beautiful. The box is a little bit excessive in its size, and there's no included accessories other than what you see right here. Okay, so remember, this is an older set from 10 years ago. So the looks of these characters is what was considered modern for 2015. You know, a lot of time has passed since then. So some of these characters might appear a lot differently in the comic books than they did back then. And let me just get the figures all in kind of like in a neutral pose. It's kind of weird because as I'm handling these figures, you know, even though the Marvel Legends style of body kind of remained consistent, you know, throughout the last, 15 years, you could kind of feel the subtle differences in the old figures versus the new ones. You know, the newer figures, they feel a little bit more refined. They feel a little bit more better engineered. You know, even though a lot of the articulation is still kind of the same, you know, as I'm handling these older figures, you know, I could kind of feel their flaws and see where the new figures have kind of improved from an engineering standpoint and a design standpoint. All right, so we have this great lineup. You know, it was very appropriate in 2015 to give us this set of characters. You know, Sam and Kate were kind of, you know, they kind of took up the mantle of the previous holders of their titles. You know, Kate became the new Hawkeye. Sam, of course, is the new Captain America, which has remained to this day. And Vision's undergone a number of changes during the history of the character, and this kind of reflects, you know, that look from 10 years back. I want to say 10 years ago might have been a couple of years removed from the Marvel Now era. Let's examine Vision first. Color scheme, you know, he still retains the green and the yellow and the red, but it's just designed a lot more radically. You know, there's a lot more patterns going on his uniform. The figure stands in at about a little under 6.5 inches. One thing that kind of still remains consistent to this day is that with Marvel Legends, they can never seem to do capes properly. This one, it just simply has a peg on the inside of the cape that plugs in, but the peg is very short, and it seems to doesn't want to stay put on the figure. The head is nicely done. You know, it's a really nice figure, but just looking at it, you can tell it's a product of its time. You know, it has the exposed pins on the elbows and on the knees. It's not as it's kind of gappy between the muscles and where the joints connect. There's a lack of a butterfly joint, and something just cracked. What was that? God, I hope it wasn't something on inside of the figure. Oh, so this one, the arms are ratcheted, or at least I hope they're ratcheted, but which is odd. I can't remember the last time there was a ratcheted. Yeah, this is a much more modern Marvel Legends figure. Everything here moves very smoothly. You can see the muscle groups when they connect. It's a very smooth transition, whereas on the older figures you can kind of see the breaks, and it doesn't sound well when you move the arms. I don't like that ratcheting noise. It feels like something's gonna break. The head looks left and right. It looks up and down. It's nice that you can look fully up because Vision is a flyer, so if you wanted to get him in flying poses. The set could have benefited from additional accessories like multiple hands, so you can mount the figure differently. But you're really stuck with the fists. He does have an ab crunch, and he could crunch forward pretty decent. Arching back is a different story. He doesn't really go that far back. You have a cut at the waist, very smooth. Cut at the bicep. Double pinned elbows. Again, you could when you move the figure and articulate it, you could kind of feel the improvements that the modern figures have. Like this one, it doesn't move as smoothly as a newer figure. The newer figures, they're better designed, better engineered. It's kind of weird because in my head, I keep on thinking that Marvel Legends hasn't really evolved all that much. But when I handle these older figures, I can really see the improvements. They might be subtle, but they are there. The legs kick up and outward. I believe this figure makes use of the older Bucky body, which was very popular, back during this time period. Overall, fair figure. I like the design of Vision. It's not his iconic evergreen design, but if you're a comic book reader during this time, it was nice to get an updated figure that reflected the look in the comic books. And let's get the cape back on and set him aside. Again, I'm not very fond of the cape attachment. I think they could have done a better job. All right, up next we have, for me, the whole reason why I bought the set, I kind of wanted comic book Kate Bishop. The female bodies from this time period, they weren't the greatest. Especially in the packaging, because of the thinner limbs, they're more prone to warping when they're in the tray. Like you can see here, legs kind of kicking out. And it feels like a very, generic kind of figure. But Kate Bishop in the comics, it's not like her costume was very elaborate. It's just very simple like what we see right here. I like the bangs, and then she has the glasses. The hair is very cleanly done. This figure is slightly shorter than Vision. She stands in at about 6 1/4 inches. She has a belt here with a loop, which accommodates what is this? The quiver with all the arrows, and then you can plug it. There's a very small peg there, and then you just plug it in. And that kind of works. I'm not sure how practical it is in combat to have her dangling all her arrows off of her hip. It seems like it would hinder her mobility. The The bow here is an accessory I believe we've gotten multiple times over. It's just repainted. You know, it has the silver on the handle. It would have been nice if they gave us a loose arrow for the figure, but, you know, we don't have one. And this is me being an idiot. I can never figure out which way is right side up to hold the bow accessory. And the fingers do not want to bend open. So let's see if we can get her in the correct pose. Yeah, you could kind of get like a pose, but you know, you're not going to want to pull this out because it's not made to like flex outward. And it would have been nice if they gave us a loose arrow. So the set's nice, but it just seems like there's a couple, you know, there's just a bunch of shortcomings. And it, as I pointed out when I was handling Vision, you know, this figure feels already very dated. You know, it was great for its time, but it doesn't hold up as well as like a modern figure does. You know, all the articulations there, you know, it's cleanly sculpted. But yeah, as soon as you handle it, it just feels like a dated figure. But again, for me, it's like, it's just nice to have a Kate Bishop figure. You know, there's the Disney Plus MCU version of Kate Bishop, which I still have to get. But I kind of wanted to get the comic book iteration of the character first. So yeah, fair figure. Not the greatest, but, you know, if you're a fan of this era, you know, it works. Alright, so that brings us to this, the Sam Wilson Captain America. This is God, I think we might have gotten this figure multiple times already. Last year there was that 2-pack that came out. No, I think it wasn't a 2-pack. I stand corrected. I think it was a deluxe box set. You know, with the release of Captain America: Brave New World, the movie, they released that deluxe Captain America Sam Wilson, and I want to say this might be the same figure as that. I could be wrong though, but as I'm handling this, it feels very much like the same figure. Which isn't a bad thing. Even though this figure is 10 years old, you know, it has a very specific body that was only made for this. It's not like the Bucky body where they reused it multiple times over. You know, so the engineering on this one feels a little bit more coherent. You know, all the pieces seem to work better with each other. And, you know, again, it does feel a little bit dated, but I still think it's a really beautiful figure. You know, if you're into collecting Captain America figures, I think this one's really worth the purchase. It's missing the wings, but, you know, I could kind of live without it. And then with the shield, I say this all the time, I never use the C-clip. You know, I'm always paranoid that they're going to snap. It doesn't seem like a very strong, you know, durable plastic that'll last over time. So I would just opt to use the peg and just plug it into the character's fist, you know, to hold it. And this hand is very stiff. The fingers do not want to pry open. Yeah, so I'm always just big into like this plugging the peg into the hand. Or, you know, better yet, if you want to recreate that look where he has it mounted onto his back, you know, go for it. It's, you know, thankfully the peg's a very long length, and then it looks great on Sam's back. Yeah, so overall, it's a fair set, you know. Again, it's very dated. If you happen to find this on a secondary market, or at a comic book show, or at a collectible toy show, or a flea market, you know, this, you know, the price you pay, you know, just keep it reasonable. I wouldn't go more than $50 for it at the most. You know, you considering, you know, these are dated figures. But yeah, for me, it's nice. You know, it's a nice piece of yesterday. You know, because, you know, even though I still read a lot of comic books, I think during the 2010s was probably when, for me, the most peak. You know, there was a period of time, especially during that time, I might have been reading like over 40 comics a month, as opposed to nowadays where I'm probably reading at the most, you know, 5 to 8 titles. So, yeah, if you're a Marvel zombie and you love, you know, this time period of the Marvel Comics, is a great set. You know, you're getting a nice version of Vision. You're getting the comic book Kate Bishop. And Sam Wilson, we've gotten him multiple times over, but, you know, it's still a great character. Alright, so let's wrap this one up. Once again, my name is Lou. If you're new to my channel, welcome. If you're a returning viewer, subscriber, thank you so much for your continued support. I greatly appreciate it. So until the next video, be safe, take care of yourself, buy lots of toys, and most importantly, be happy. And I'll see you at the next one. Alright, later.